Halloween is a holiday I happen to be quite fond of. The decorations lighting up the block and the anticipation over who will ring the doorbell. The tradition we kept in our home was harmless and very loved by the town. We would take photos of each group that came to the door, and then the school would do a collage of the photos. Last year was when I stopped the tradition, though my stubbornness has kept me from hating the holiday. Therefore, I still decorated this year, as always. It came at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and the doorbell rang. I opened the door to the children, off-tuned Twinkle Twins and a Power Ranger. The young girl was the witch, and she made it a point to tell me that her mother had made the costume just for her. I snapped a picture and gave them each a handful of candy before they scurried away to the next house. Their parents waved to me and told me how excited they were to see the next collage of photos to hang on the wall. I shut the door and let the Polaroid slip out, waving it in the air for it to come into focus as I awaited the next group of children. This went on for 2 hours until the crowd was getting smaller, and the youngest of the crowd was being walked home. I always stood outside to give another handful of candy to them, so they would be more willing to their tired parents. Their eyes lit up at the new handful of candy and bounced away, and soon the older kids came. I never turned anyone away. I always thought that if they had enough in them to dress up, they could have candy. I always bought a load of it anyway. Why deny them a treat? It wasn't unusual to have a few rude teenagers, but after the usual ones came by, I began to realize I was growing more and more tired. I was thinking of calling it a night, but before I could begin to turn off the lights outside and put away the candy, another knock came to the door. Unlike the rest, this group asked, "Trick or treat, open up and we will choose for you." I laughed at the little phrase and nodded my head. "All right, I'm sure you'll choose something fun." I reached for the doorknob and started to see that it was already turning. I furrowed my brow at this and shook my head. "No, that isn't how you get candy." I thought it was just another group of children joking, or teens being a bit too devious. But my eyes looked down to the usual shadows that would be cast under the doorway and saw nothing. And yet, the voices still chimed from the other side. "We choose Trick." It was a cold and dark tone, enough to make me quickly lock the top lock of the door and step back. I felt my heart beating quickly. My hands shook with the candy dancing within the basket they were held in. "We choose Trick. Open up or you will be our treat," the voice was demanding, and a scratch ran from the top of the door to the bottom. But still, no shadow was shown. "Please open up." A voice of a little girl was now coming from the other side. "I only meant it as a joke. I'm sorry." I saw the shadow of what appeared to be a dress and felt relieved. But as soon as I moved closer, I let my paranoia take over and peered through the peephole, noting the way the shadow stood at the bottom. There was indeed no one there. "Can you please open up?" she giggled. I put the candy down, and my brain thought of one thing: taking its photo. I took the camera into my hands and grabbed the doorknob. I thought if I got a photo, there would be a reason for whatever it was to stop. Such silly logic now that I look back on it. I opened the door and snapped the photo, only to hear a scream and felt my body being pushed to the ground. I felt my head hit against the side table and everything went black. I awoke to my neighbor hovering over me with worry painted in her eyes. "Those teenagers never learn," she said. She always blamed teenagers for everything. I leaned forward and saw my camera was broken on the floor, but I was more concerned for the photo. I started looking for it, ignoring my neighbor trying to look at my head that was still pounding. Finally, I saw it laying on the ground under a scattered amount of candy bags. Reaching forward and dusting it off, I stared at it and felt my blood run cold. There was nothing, but something was written on the bottom of the Polaroid. "Next year, I don't have candy this year, nor do I have a camera, but I have the photo. And as the holiday comes near, I will simply leave a bowl of candy in front of my door and stay with my neighbor." I'm still not sure what made me more afraid, the fact that the photo had a smiley face, or the fact that it wasn't a photo of my door but of my neighbor's. Either way, I can't let the woman face this alone. There's always a reason to be afraid. Several years ago, right before I was about to leave for trick-or-treating on Halloween. I got into a fight with my mom. I had told her I was going to pick up a friend and go out with that friend, but my mom insisted I had an adult with me. I raged, thinking it would be too embarrassing to have to follow around an adult like a child. I was old enough to look after myself, or at least I thought so. After the episode with my mom, I ran to my room and raged that she would do that to me. However, instead of obeying her, I devised a plan to get what I wanted. My younger brother and sister were going to go trick-or-treating with my mom and my mom's friend and her son. I decided that I would tell my mom I was sorry for lashing out and that I was going to stay home and pass out candy. Then, after she left with my siblings, I was going to go out like I had planned. I planned it perfectly too. I knew what time they were going to come back home. I knew what route they were going to take, and I congratulated myself for my cunning plan. After my family left, I got together my costume. I was going as a gangster, which was probably the worst thing I could have done, but I was blinded by my excitement to realize my mistake. My mind went wild with all the things I could do now that my parents were gone. I could really live. I got so deep into this idea of being on my own that I decided I was going to trick or treat on my own, and called my friend to tell her I was canceling. Another huge mistake. I left the house with quite a bit of confidence in myself. The first street I went down went great. I got loads of candy and was having a great time. Once again, my excitement and confidence blinded me from the strange looks I got from being alone. I turned left down another street, my pride building with every step. I was almost at the end of the street, thinking of ways to explain all the candy I got to my parents when I realized I was being followed. By the time I had come to this realization, I was at the section of the street where it was kind of out in the open. No trees between the sidewalk and the road, and I didn't see any other kids near me. There was a car, and quite a trashy one at that, following a few feet behind me. All my confidence had vanished, and my hair stood on end. I glanced behind myself at the car, and all the windows were down, and 3 men were in the car, smoking cigarettes. They were glaring right at me. As soon as I caught their stare, all the warnings my mother had given me about creeps like this hit me in the head. I looked down at my gangster costume and knew I blew it. I looked like a thug. I quickly turned back around and started walking, my heart beating out of my chest. My whole body went numb, and I instantly forgot how to do everything except walk forward. I was at the last house on the street, with the car still following close behind when I made the split decision to turn up the driveway of the last house. Now, the house I turned to was completely abandoned, and had been for years. The windows were boarded up, and the front yard had been scattered in junk. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that the house was abandoned. The car stopped right in front of the house, and everyone inside the car was just staring directly at me. I walked up to the front porch and turned around, thanking God for the tall bushes blocking the porch from the street and blocking the creeper's view. I stood there for at least a minute, staring right back at them, knowing I wasn't going to make it. My heart thumped out of my chest, and I could hear it ringing in my ears. One of them got out of the car. He stood and looked directly at me through the bushes and into my soul. I stood, holding the rusty doorknob, staring right back at him. We must have stood like that for a long 10 seconds before the men got back into the car, and they peeled down the street. Once they were gone, I ran as fast as I could across the street and up the opposite direction, frantically looking for someone I knew. I spotted my brother's friend and his mother and walked right behind them until they reached my street. I got a few weird looks from my mom, but I really didn't care. I ran up to my house and cried myself to sleep. I still live in the same neighborhood, and every time I pass the abandoned house, I silently thank it for saving my life. I don't know why the creeps didn't come after me, as they likely knew that the house was also abandoned. I used to own a small Halloween-themed shop located downtown in a fairly small city. Unlike many businesses in town that suffered after Walmart's arrival, my store never really struggled when it came to customers. Of course, it was only open for the month of October. I sold a lot of unique items you might find at other novelty stores in bigger cities, but at more affordable prices. I didn't do it for profit as much as to celebrate the spooky Halloween spirit. I also love to celebrate that spirit by doing my best to scare the living daylights out of people every Halloween. On one particular Halloween, my chosen victim was my friend Alex. He was a relaxed and easygoing guy most of the time, which made him the perfect target for the prank I had in mind. First, you should know that I always began packing up my store on Halloween fairly early in the morning, as it was unlikely to get customers on the holiday itself. I told Alex that I had some much heavier merchandise that year and could use his help moving it out. Not knowing what he was getting into, he accepted the request, and I told him to meet me at the shop around 10 p.m. sharp. As I said, Alex was a very relaxed and calm guy for most of the time. Unfortunately for him, he had once confessed to me his irrational fear of clowns and how he couldn't function around them. Naturally, my plan involved dressing up in a clown costume. When he arrived at the shop, I would stand perfectly still like a statue. When he realized he couldn't find me, he would most likely call me. But when my phone rang, it would be in the pocket of an apparent clown statue. When he came over to investigate, I would give him my best scare. A pretty simple plan, right? Everything was set in motion. I dressed up and stood near the back of the store, obscured by some boxes and other decorations, and waited for his arrival. A little after 10 o'clock, Alex entered. It was very dark as I made the last-minute decision to cut out the lights before he arrived. He called my name a few times, but of course I didn't respond. I heard him walking around a bit, looking for me. I could barely hold back my laughter. But after more shuffling, I heard Alex speak in a defensive tone. "Not funny, dude." I looked around, but there was definitely no way he could see me right now, even if I had twitched or anything. I continued to play dumb. "Come on, man," he repeated, sounding angrier this time. "That's not funny." Confused, I quietly adjusted a nearby stack of boxes so I could peer through a crack toward his voice. I couldn't make out his shape very well, but I knew for sure he was not looking in my direction. Suddenly my phone rang. I heard Alex turn toward the sound instantly, and I froze, giddy with excitement that the plan might be working. But as he approached, I realized he wasn't holding his phone, and a wave of disappointment fell over me as I discovered my prank had been ruined by another caller. "All right, fine, you got me," I announced shortly after the phone stopped ringing, taking off my mask and stepping out into the open. But Alex's face didn't look relieved. Instead, his face twisted in horror in a way I had never seen before. He began yelling and spouting panicked words, and I spent the next few minutes trying to get him to calm down. He explained that when he entered the store, a man in a clown costume was staring at him and then began slowly walking toward him. But when my phone rang, the man had dashed right out of the store. Alex had no idea that I was actually hiding in the back of the store the whole time. I don't want to think about what could have happened if Alex had shown up late that night, or if my other friend had never called during the prank. Hello, everyone. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful or entertaining, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. Your support motivates us to create more content you'll love. Thanks a million. And if you've just subscribed, please drop a comment saying I subscribed. We'd love to welcome you to our community.